and welcome to New Jersey Legislative Update. New Jersey probation officers currently supervise over 100,000 probationers. But if one of those offenders physically threatens a probation officer, the only weapon he has to protect himself is pepper spray in some instances. Probation officers want to change that. They want them to carry guns. 30th District Senator Robert Singer has sponsored a bill which would give probation officers the same privileges as parole officers and police officers. Senator Singer and Stuart Martinson of the Probation Association of New Jersey are joining us now to talk more about the topic. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
I guess, first of all, to set this up, if you would, Senator Singer, I know that you had authorized some legislation at the last legislature, which I'm sure expired now. You plan to reintroduce that again?
Absolutely. It will be reintroduced this week. Unfortunately, failed to get it through both houses and on the governor's desk signed, but we're confident that we'll be able to do it this time.
Now, if you would outline that legislation for us and tell us what kind of rights it does give the probation officers that they're looking for.
Basically, it's going to give probation officers the full rights of police action. This allows them to carry a gun and to arrest someone if they're in the process of seeing a crime, things like that. In essence, I think it puts an additional 1,500 to 2,000 police-type people on the street. And second of all, as we've been dealing with and discussing, is probation is no longer dealing with minor offenses. These are serious offenders in many cases. Many of them, unfortunately, have carried weapons in the past and might carry them in the future, and you're having a probation officer totally unarmed, dealing with, in some cases, repeat offenders, and not having at least the protection to know that they can protect themselves or anyone else around them.
Now, Senator Singer, how did it first come to your attention? Who approached you with this?
We've been discussing, as you know, we're taking a look at both probation and parole in general and how we can change what is happening. The probation officers were very concerned because, again, as I said, the type of criminal they're dealing with. And they felt that they could do a lot more, both for themselves and for the state as a whole, to be able to have police powers and be able to have a gun with them in necessary and tough areas. And I think it's very important. And as I said before, it puts an additional 1,500 to 2,000 police people on the streets protecting the citizens of our state. Very positive thing, very good thing. And again, we're not talking about untrained people, we're not talking about people who haven't gone through the same training that a police officer goes for, who is dealing with the criminal element, should be able to protect themselves and protect those around him.
Added protection that I'm sure, Stuart, you can tell us about firsthand knowledge, since you do work for the Ocean County Probation Officers Office as well as your firsthand knowledge in the state. Can you give us a little insight, if you would, please, on your firsthand knowledge and why it is so necessary that you have guns when you, for example, go into a drug violator's home?
Sure. I've been a probation officer for 10 years, and most of that time I've spent in adult supervision. And I know for a fact that I've had some very bad areas that I've had to go into while as a probation officer, and I've had to be intrusive. And when you're intrusive into these people's lives, many of our probationers are not simply one-time offenders, as the senator was saying. They're getting more violent. We have offenders on probation who have committed murder in the past. They've committed serious sexual assaults, robberies. In many cases, we get probationers who have committed more serious crimes, but the crimes are downgraded to less serious ones. So we're at the point now where when we do go out into the field, or even in the office, we have probationers coming in, we're dealing with them, we're interacting with them. We know that in some cases they may be armed even. We're concerned about that. They're a threat to us in the office, in the field. And this is a major problem for us all over the state, not just in Ocean County, although statistically there are over 100,000 adult probationers in New Jersey alone, and I believe that accounts to 2,000 per 100,000 residents. And that's not including your juvenile population, which I believe is around 20 or 30,000. And your domestic violence offenders and sex offenders as well. Per
residence. Now, what would that ratio be of probation officers with their caseload, for example, per their probationers?
Approximately, I think there are 1,500 to 1,600 probation officers now in the judiciary in the state of New Jersey. In Ocean County, it's probably more like 83 or 85, but not all of them are doing supervision work. The emphasis has been taken away from the supervision of adults and juveniles by the judiciary, and more emphasis has been placed on other areas. of judicial functions.
By the way, I think it's part of a problem, too. There's no question about it in the revamping of the penal system of our state. We need more probation officers, more parole officers, more supervision, more closer, less load per probation officer to do the kind of job we want to see. We're not happy with what is happening, certainly in the penal system within our state. We have more prisons today we had in 1980. No one feels safer than they did in 1980. And the fact is we can't continue to build more and more prisons and not have the backup services of both probation and parole officers there to supervise the person once they come out. I know we've also seen they're going to do a major overhaul. Assemblyman Hofstapel is heading that, of the parole system itself, and take a look at what we're doing at. But when someone comes out on parole or probation, we have to make sure that there's backup there to supervise them, make sure they have a job, make sure they have a place to live, and make sure they are doing the right things and not see the repeat offender situation that is happening 2 and 3 and 4 times within the system.
That's a good point you mentioned. And with the parole commission, the media obviously has seen recently that the state and the governor and our legislators are acknowledging there is a problem and our parole system does need to be revamped. I'd like to talk about the particulars on those things in a moment, but first we have to take a short break. So stay with us. We'll be right back here at New Jersey Legislative Update. Hi, welcome back to New Jersey Legislative Update, and we're talking about probation officers and the issue of whether or not they should carry guns and have the same power that police officers do in the state of New Jersey here. Senator Singer, when we left it before the break, we were talking about some of the things we've seen in the media lately, and I myself, as a matter of fact, went to the Parole Commission hearing headed by Assemblyman Holzappel. Things in the news recently, like the Mudman-Simon case and the Collins case, they've certainly illustrated the need for revamping here in our parole system. Would you not agree?
Absolutely. It's brought to our attention the frightening things that are happening out there. First of all, there's a lot of problems with parolees and having used drugs in prison. There is no program for them in many prisons for rehabilitation. They come back out being drug addicts again. I mean, those kind of things have to be stopped. There has to be certain mandates to see that people coming out of prison, not only the fact they're clean when they're in there and clean when they come out, that they stay clean from those type of situations. Because again, they become the repeat offenders. We've got to make sure they have jobs, they have decent places to live, and they are supervised where they're at. Probation officers, parole officers have to be able to do that. With the caseloads they have, they can't do that. They can't thoroughly check on that person. You know something? There's nothing better than the probation officer or the parole officer physically there making sure that person's going to work every day, where that person's living, and the fact is they're not breaking their probation or parole. If that doesn't happen, you get the recidivism of repeat offenders time and time again. They want to put a stop to it. Person doing that can't go out there unarmed. A person doing that can't do it thoroughly without police powers. And more important, you need more of them. So I think there's some aspects we have to look at, and I think that's one part that we're going to look at, both parole and probation officers, beefing them up, getting more of them out there, and really changing around what is happening in the penal system within the state.
Stuart, I'm aware of the fact that way back in 1974, I think it was, probation officers did have the right to carry a firearm back then. Then they lost it. Why was that, and why was all that changed then?
Yes, I think it was a philosophy at that time in the 70s, which was a social work one. And apparently many of the hierarchy now that exists in the administrative office of the courts continues to believe in a social work philosophy, which is obviously not working, as the Senator has indicated, with parolees and now, of course, with the probationers as well. These are more violent offenders we're dealing with. Social work is not working, although it's still a component of what we should be doing, but there must be more of an emphasis on surveillance, on search and seizure, and on other measures such as those in order to ensure public safety.
Obviously, there have been some societal changes from the things that you're just mentioning, and here in the 90s, some of the things you've just mentioned are real cold, hard facts, I guess we should say. If you could just kind of tell us, if you could, what is the greatest risk that a probation officer faces on a daily basis? Give us some kind of idea, if you could.
I think that the greatest risk is confrontation, especially in the areas of the supervision areas, juveniles and adults. The probation officer is, as a necessity, the role is to confront the probationer, whether it be a juvenile or an adult, and get them to obey the law, get them to obey the court's order. And in many cases, essentially, that means to enforce the law almost, to interact with the police to ensure the public safety. And I think that confrontation aspect is the main reason why we need to be given full law enforcement powers under the Senator's
By the way, that goes really to the heart of what we're talking about. If he had a confrontation, he'd have to call a local police person to come there and arrest that person.
Oh, is that right?
He can't arrest that person per se.
That's correct.
And that's really key to it. I mean, they know that. The person on probation knows that, and knows that they don't have that police power. They should. It's ridiculous. But even going further into it, you know, we're seeing that we've passed legislation to talk about 3 times and in. You know, I mean, you know, the three strike type of concepts. There are 2 areas we have to put our money into. We've got to look at the first-time offender, the youthful offender, and making sure they don't become a repeat offender, and working on that, and doing all the programs with. There's a DARE program that works so well, and all these other things like that, getting kids away from drugs, understanding that. And then we've got to take a look at the repeat offender and make sure they're monitored safely so we don't have the kind of problems that have happened in the past. I think this is just one step in the right direction. And being fearful for a person who's probation, not knowing that the person that's monitoring him doesn't have a gun, doesn't have police power, is a negative, not a positive. I don't know why the courts are afraid of this. I don't believe that their job is a total social work job today. It's a police type of job with social work in that. They've always had excellent records, are doing fine jobs. I think they're asking for something that makes sense. And again, it protects the public, protects themselves, and in general, I think sends a stronger message to people on probation.
Public safety seems to be the key issue here. We're talking about Stewart perhaps being, not only Stewart being protected by having a gun, but when you're saying he takes that moment to go make that phone call, what could that probationer do in the meantime, which we've both seen this past year? So.
Well, again, it's knowing that he doesn't have those powers, and they know it.
They do.
We think that people on probation or parole don't know the law. Wrong. They know it better than we do.
Yeah, do you think they actually take advantage then?
Absolutely. They know where they can push them. They know how to push their button, and they know you can't do anything about it. You have to go find a police person. I mean, it becomes ridiculous. This is a person is on probation. They should be monitored by a person who has the skills that a probation officer has, but should also have the authority of a police person in that.
You mentioned the state Supreme Court. We should probably enlighten our viewers that the state Supreme Court ruled against the probation officers joining the union. I don't know, bring us up to speed on that lawsuit, Stuart, if you would, where that stands right now.
Currently, we have a lawsuit against the administrative office of the courts and the Supreme Court, which has barred us from being affiliated with the Police Benevolent Association. Probation officers have been barred from either being members of the PBA or, for that matter, the Fraternal Order of Police. And we feel that PANJ, the Probation Association of Jersey, under the president, Mr. George Christie, feels that probation officers should have that right, that it's a right of the Constitution to join a union of your choice, and essentially the Police Benevolent Association has been extremely supportive of our efforts, and the 3rd District Court in Philadelphia hopefully will make that decision sometime
this year. So the PBA
is
in favor of this?
That's
they
correct.
Would like
Absolutely. The police organizations are in favor of this. They realize the benefit for it. They understand the danger they're under. And for some strange reason that we have the officers of the court thinking that, no, they're not at risk like that. I wish they had to go out with and deal with some of the people they do and understand that their life is at risk, and certainly for both their families and the general public, this becomes a safety issue.
What do you think is going to happen in the courts, Senator? Do you think they will see the light and see that
Well,
danger?
I really think that with Assemblyman Hofstadter's look at parole, that whole revamping of what's going to happen, they're just not going to have a choice. We're going to take the legislative action. This is not their jurisdiction, it's ours. It's a legislative situation. We'll take the proper action. I think you're going to see this pass, as well as major reforms in parole and everything else that the people are concerned about.
Okay. We're going to talk a little bit more of that in a moment if we can. We have to take a short break right now. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Gentlemen, when we left, we were talking about the problems and the reasons why it is so important for the probation officers to carry guns. And I also mentioned that I was in Trenton a couple weeks ago for Assemblyman Holzapfel's commission. One of the things that was brought up there is the caseload and how it's just getting worse. You're responsible for more and more numbers every day. Is that ever going to revert to less numbers at some point? Is it what needs to be done there, Stuart?
Exactly. I think that parole officers are finding that to be a problem, and probation officers are as well. Our caseloads in some instances are over 150 for each person in the supervision units, and possibly higher than that in some other areas of the judiciary where probation officers are working, whether it be in child support or in any other area, child support enforcement, I should say, or in the juvenile supervision unit or adult. So that this problem obviously amounts to a situation where we're simply unable to perform our duties properly if we have 100 to 150 offenders to look after on a daily basis.
And concentrating solely on Ocean County now, is the issue of crime, is crime increasing here in Ocean County and the need for more probation officers to handle those probationers?
I think we're seeing a lot more violent offenders on probation now, both juveniles and adults. I believe that this is probably occurring in a lot of other areas, but in Ocean County, I would imagine that the crime rate certainly isn't tremendously dropping. And again, as I said, with more and more offenders being placed on probation, it's more and more offenders in the Ocean County community that need to be more stringently supervised to protect particularly the elderly in our communities, those people that simply aren't able, or in areas where there are not a lot of police departments or a lot of policemen in the towns that are able to do this. This is something that we should be doing.
Now, and beside the fact that you have to supervise the probationer, I think someone also mentioned to me that there's a problem because Ocean County doesn't technically have a probation office set up here in Ocean County, and I think they had to travel as far as Atlantic City to do that. Is that correct?
Well, we have an office in Toms River, and we have a satellite office in Manahawkin and Lakewood, although now with the state takeover of the judiciary of the probation departments, we're not sure how long those offices will continue to exist. But in many cases, we're only at those offices on a maybe once a week basis, so we're not always manning those offices.
Another question that always keeps popping up is why the parole board, the parole bureau rather, the parole board, probation, and the ISP are all under different departments in our branches of government. Is that silly to you? Do you think that should be all condensed into one?
Well, I think there's going to be some looking at how that's handled. For example, you know, the parole board has certain mandates, doesn't give them flexibility as to if someone has to stay in prison. They have certain guidelines they have to go to. They want to see some changes in that also. They want to have more flexibility to be able to keep someone in as opposed to what's happening now. And one thing they claimed before is you don't have to guarantee, people think that if you're going to go on parole, they have to guarantee I have a job to go to and I have a house to live in, all these things. Those things are gone by the wayside. We've got to go back and start to say we have to be responsible for a person who is leaving prison, that they are going to be successful and not return. And if they're not going to be successful, then we can't just let them out. And we've got to say, you know, get past that idea that we're just going to empty out the prisons to make room for more. That just doesn't work. We have a concern in Ocean County that's certainly a great concern to us. We have a very vulnerable population. The senior population is a vulnerable population, and the answer is we have to make sure that the crime statistics continue not to increase at any rate at all in Ocean County because of that population. The senior population is growing. It's not shrinking in Ocean County. And we don't want to see a situation where we have major problems. I believe that by beefing up both parole officers and probation officers to make sure that those coming in the county on either probation or parole are supervised properly is a safeguard to our senior population. And that will end up being a safeguard statewide. But I think that's part of the key of turning around the situation with repeat offenders, knowing they're being monitored, knowing that someone is checking up on them. You know, if you had the same caseload in DIFAS that these probation officers have, we'd all be offended. We'd say, how can you check on those children, that type of caseload? We're talking about a caseload of 100, 150 offenders. On a monthly basis, how many times can you speak to those 150 offenders? You can't. You can't physically do that. And then when there's a problem, they say to the probation, well, how did this happen? Why did this happen? You've got to give them the wherewithal, not only to protect themselves, but also more of them, to make sure that person coming out of
And then in their defense, they're reprimanded, perhaps with a suspension, like we've just seen in the Collins case, for example, right?
Exactly.
Senator Singer, how successful, or how confident, I should say, are you about this when you bring this before the Senate?
I feel good because the attention has been brought from other, unfortunately, some sad cases that we have to do more. And as I said at the very beginning, we have to look for, number one, how to prevent crime, how to deal with that first-time offender that does not get into the system on more serious matters and clamp down on that. And then we have to take a look at the serious offender when they get out of prison and how they're dealt with within the communities. Part of that is, and we can talk about it as much as we want, it's got to be, you said, talk about the policeman on the street, it's got to be the probation officer, the parole officer, there on a constant basis. I think the legislature wants to start to make a major change. I think they realize, and the governor realizes, that if we don't make these major changes, we're going to have more serious problems like we've had in the past. This is the best way to do it. Start to give them police powers, and then turn around and find the money. And it's not going to be easy, but this is where you have to spend the money on more probation officers and more parole officers in the state.
Stuart, I'm sure that's something you agree with.
Oh, yes, very much so.
I have to say goodbye to you at this time, unfortunately, but I want to thank you for coming in today and enlightening us on an issue like this, which is of such extreme public safety, especially here in Ocean County, since you mentioned our elderly population as well. And hopefully you'll come back in again and tell us more about it.
Thank you very much, and thank the Senator, too,
Okay.
for his assistance for us.
And don't go away. We'll be right back with Senator Singer and some of his